welcome back for another episode of Chasing Ghosts. This is the video series where I talk about those hard to find, those impossible to find comics, those really, really tough books that you just don't see all the time at your LCS. These are some things you got to get lucky in finding, do some legwork, be patient, and as I said, a lot of times get lucky in finding these. Normally, these books are variants or high ratio incentive variants, things like that. But this week, I decided to take a different tact based off of some comments from some viewers over time. And this is going to be a selection of older books, older indie first appearances that are really, really tough to find even today. So hopefully you enjoy this series as well as everything else here on the channel. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure that you like, you subscribe, you hit that alert button so you don't miss anything. You keep telling your friends so we can keep growing the channel. And if you want to see this week's selection of books, just hang on for a few seconds after the intro and I will be right back. All right, so as I said, this is going to be a little bit different. Initially, I had a little bit of a larger list, and then that list grew a little bit too much to cover in one episode. So I decided to cut this in half and I'm going to do 10 today, and I'll save another 10 to do another time further down the line. But basically, we're going to be looking at some older books, some classic indie books that just, don't show up all that often. Some of these things are very rare. Some of these things are very unique. Some of these things have multiple printings. You got to watch out for, fake copies and counterfeit copies, etc. So with that all said, let's just dive right into the list and start off with Cerebus the Aardvark. Yes, at one time, this was the longest running indie title out there as it ran, 300 issues before Spawn passed him and took the mantle and became that record-breaking, title. So, indie publisher, and it's not one of the big two. That's what we're talking about here. Also, I think it also had to be with the continuity of, the creator, etc. But with that, Dave Sim's classic came out originally way back in December 1977. A little after I was born, but not by much. Now, this episode, we are not even going to bother trying to guesstimate at print runs. I have no idea, nor is there any reliable source that could tell us how many copies may exist. Some of these you will see there might be hundreds, if not thousands of copies in the census, but even despite that, these books just don't show up all that often. So with that, we're going to go right from the creator page, skip the estimated print run, and go right to the CGC census, because as I said, there are 379 copies in the census for this book, but there is no 9.8 copy in existence, at least yet, let alone a 9.9. There is only a single 9.6, and it is signature series. A couple of, actually 5.94s, 9.92s, and then you can see the bulk of the books really in that meat of the book are in the kind of 6 to 7 kind of range. More that mid-grade level, because this is an older book. This was not something that was well taken care of. And again, it was not printed on the highest quality of paper, I guess you would say. But even with that all said, and the 379 copies, this book going back almost 5 decades at this point, was 44, 45 years at least. But with that said, couple of copies sold recently, and it does not sell cheap. You can see a 5.0 with color touch and a purple label sold for $1,500, and then another purple label with a 7.0 sold for just under $2,000. So, still not a cheap book. And if you want to get one, well, as I said, there's not many out there. In fact, I only found 2 currently listed. One of them is a blue label, 6.5, looking for almost $4,000. And then there's a 7.5 that's looking for almost $7,000. So yeah, not a cheap book at all. But it is a classic. It is a classic. Next up, we're going to go over to the Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But no, we're not going to look at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1, because yes, while hard to find and very, 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 very expensive, they are out there. We're going to look for their first appearance, which came in the form of an ad, basically, in Gobbledygook. So Mirage Studios, the creators, Laird and Eastman, they created Fugitoid. They also created the Turtles. This gobbledygook book was self-published. It's basically stapled paper, like photocopied paper they stapled together to make a book. And again, it is the first appearance of the turtles, teasing them here on the back. So with that, this was made in November of 1983. This thing has counterfeit copies out there. There are even graded counterfeit copies, which we'll get to in a little bit. But in the census for this book predates, obviously, their first appearance in comics. There are only 24 in the census for this. I guess we call it a comic. Do we call it a preview book? Do we call it a fanzine? I don't know what you want to call this. Because again, it is basically photocopied staple paper, as I understand it. I've never actually had one or even seen one of these. But with that, there are a pair of 94s, 492s, 790s, and then a handful of others that fill out that 24. Only 24. Estimates put this book at maybe 150 to 500 copies made initially. Take that for what it's worth. Again, decades old, information is kind of stale. Who knows what happened to these things? Because again, they were just printed themselves by Eastman and Laird. Copies do sell for quite a bit of money, though. These two, and I was surprised to find two, but both of these sold as part of some auction that came from some estate of some collector who had recently passed, I believe. But there was copies that sold for $13,000 and $18,000. And yes, they were selling issues 1 and 2 of Gobbledygook, but for the most part, people are buying this because they want issue 1. Not so much issue 2. Yes, issue 2 is also collectible, don't get me wrong, but it's really for that issue 1. And $13,000, $18,000 are ridiculously high amounts of money for what is basically photocopy paper. But it is also history, so let's not forget that too. And with that, what's available? Well, those two just sold, and I thought it was an April Fool's joke because they both sold on April 1st, but doesn't seem to be. So looks like they legit sold yesterday. Outside of that, the copies that are listed, there are blue labels and even yellow labels. But what's funny is they're listed as 9.8 counterfeit. It's on the label like 3 times. It's like counterfeit, counterfeit, counterfeit. You can see it's printed on this yellow paper too. Got to watch out for that, I suppose. I don't know how I would trust buying a raw copy of this from anyone. I just don't know if I could do it personally. But this is part of the hobby. This is the risk you take. But even here, you can see $13,000 is the ask for that counterfeit version of this. And then you can see there's a couple signature series, 1 and 2 for a 7.0 and a 7.5, $8,000. So still thousands of dollars for even knockoff copies of this fanzine or whatever you want to call it. Again, I don't know what we want to call this, but there it is. It is not easy to find. So we're not going to count those counterfeit copies because those aren't real in my mind. Yes, they're still real, hard to find apparently. I don't know when those counterfeits were produced, but I don't know if they're considering them a later printing. But we're going to move on to our next book. And our next book is going to stay kind of in that same vein of a cartoony type of character. And we're going to go over to check out Bone. Now, Bone actually first appeared here in Thorn, Tales from the Lantern, which is a collection of the newspaper stories or the newspaper strips that Jeff Smith did, for the Lantern, which I think was his college paper. I think it was somewhere in Ohio. I don't remember exactly which school he went to off the top of my head. I'm just drawing a blank at this moment. But Tales from the Lantern did come from those strips, and this is a collected edition, basically. And this came out in September of 1983, which is well before we actually got Bone #1, the comic book. With that, this, early printing or whatever you want to call it, also has some copies in the census. There are only 9. Oh, Ohio State. So the Ohio State University newspaper. Oh, I don't know why I couldn't remember Ohio State. But anyway, it collects Jeff Smith's cartoons from the Ohio State University newspaper, The Lantern. Jeff Smith cover. 9 copies in the census. There is a 194 is the highest, a 92, a couple of 90s, an 85, a pair of 7s, and a 6.5. And then the worst is a 4.5. Not a lot. Not a lot. I believe one of these sold raw not too long ago, too, but not going to be something you find very easily and not something that sells all that often, as we've got no sales in the last 3 months. And when I went looking for what you could buy if you were in the market, well, there is only one out there, and somebody would like $60,000 for their copy. Yes, $60,000. is the ask. 36 watchers. I don't think they're going to actually fetch that price, but doesn't hurt to ask. Doesn't hurt to ask. Now, just for the sake of keeping things simple and also just checking it out, let's look at Bone number one. So, Bone number one, cartoon books. This came out in 1991. So, July 1991, Jeff Smith, Bone, introduced to the world. A lot of copies in the census for our purposes here, 496. But again, this is not an incentive. This is not a ratio book. This is the entire run of this. Multiple printings on this book as well. So finding a first print isn't going to be the easiest thing in the world to do. With that said, the first appearance of Foam Bone, you can see the pile of different grades we have here, all kind of bunched up. 28.98, 65.96, 75.94, yada, 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 down the line, making out that 496. Copies have sold, and they have sold recently, including a big deal sale of a CBCS 9.8 signed by Jeff Smith himself, yellow label graded. They were asking 15 grand. They accepted $12,000, and that sold back in January. Apart from that, I found a raw copy sale for 1,600 bucks on 23 bids, and then a 8.0 that sold for just under $1,000 as well. So it's not a cheap book either, but 3 sales. And if you wanted to go shopping for one, well, there actually were copies available. And there's more than just these 4. Not a ton more. I want to say there was like 10, maybe even 12 copies. But you can see the prices ranging all over the place depending on grade. There's a raw looking for $5,000 that says it's signed, but looks like by Jeff Smith. And then they, like I said, there's a CBCS 5.5 looking for $1,100. There's a 7.5 CGC looking for $2,000. And a CGC 8.0 looking for 1,700 bucks, getting sold through my comic shop. If you're interested, anytime you see something like listed by my comic shop on eBay, just go directly to my comic shop, and it's generally cheaper because they're not paying the eBay fees. So just saying, they dual list usually. Not to say anybody's going to go out and buy this Bone number one, but in case you did, you might save yourself like $100 by going over to MCS directly. With that said, that's Bone, and obviously plenty of copies available there, so it's not like that Tales from the Lantern. But our next character, I was going to go with the number one because it also has later printings, etc., but instead we're going to go with the first appearance, which is in this New England Comics newsletter, and the character I'm talking about now is the Tick, who you could see way down here in the corner. I'll even zoom in, introducing the Tick way down here. You see him? Yep. He gets introduced here in this newsletter. So the New England Comics newsletter, issue 14 from 1986. This is not something you're going to find very easily, but it does have Ben Edlund's creation, The Tick, first appearance inside. Again, July 1986. This has been graded too. Not many graded, but there is 21 in the census. Highest 296s, 494s, 492s, and a few others rounding out that 21. As you might imagine, doesn't sell all that often. So no sales in the last 3 months, but I did manage to find one listing. And it is one of those graded copies. You can see it here. It looks like it's in one of those magazine size, those oversized slabs. It's at auction. Still has 5 days left. So don't know where that's going to end. Again, I found this earlier today, filming this on Tuesday, the day that I'm dropping this. In fact, I'm going to drop this in an hour or two. As soon as I'm done, I'll edit it up and then you guys can enjoy. But a CGC 7.0, $600 already, still has 5 days left. It's going to end Sunday night. We'll see where that falls. But there you go. That first appearance of the Tick in the New England Comics newsletter. Again, this is not something that comes up all that often. Surprised to even find that one that is there. Up next, going to go more towards the 90s with a character I remember fondly because he hit it big when I was collecting comics as a young teen in the 90s, when Image Comics was first created. And the character I'm talking about is the Savage Dragon. Yeah. We got Spawn. We got Wildcats. Eric Larson decided to go back into his pocket to a character he created a long time ago and bring back Savage Dragon. And that book is still running today. Granted, it's a different dragon. It's his son, Malcolm. It's not the original Paul. But Dragon, nonetheless, still going on all these many years later. I remember, as a youngster, This was the book I was looking for. Reading my wizard, I remember them talking about this is the first appearance of the Savage Dragon. This is the one you got to find. This Megaton #3. Looked everywhere. Was digging through boxes at shops, looking. This is before the internet, obviously. So I couldn't do any online shopping. Digging at every shop I could go to, flea markets, what have you, wherever I could find. Never came across this Megaton #3 that also has Vanguard fighting dragon there on the front. This was Eric Larson. This is 1985. This book has a decent number in the census. There's 260, 5298, 7996s, etc. Copies sell. This book sells, and it actually doesn't sell for all that much anymore. It used to be expensive, or at least I remember it as being expensive, but $71 at auction, $80, $46 raw, best off on $100, and there's more sales than this. This is the recent stuff. This is just stuff through March and the tail end of February, and available copies as well. $419 it looks like for a 9.6, $450 for a 9.8, $40 for a raw copy with only 6. That one's ending today, so 907. So maybe by the time this airs, that auction will be ended, and $80. I don't know. I might want to get one of these for $40. Maybe I'll throw a bid down if that's a good condition copy. It's just one of those things I always wanted when I was younger, because again, it tied into what I was reading at the time, Savage Dragon. But this is not the dragon's first appearance. It's what I thought was his first appearance forever, but he actually appeared before this. So Megaton #3 is not actually the dragon's first, but some like to call it first full, whatever. But there are plenty of copies to be had if you're looking. You got to go back a little bit further. Graphic Fantasy #1. You can see him right there. There's a dragon along with Prism and Ironhawk. Some other creations there. Ajax comics. I don't remember no Ajax comics, but Eric Larson, a few years earlier, back in 1982, released this, and this would be our first appearance of the dragon. Granted, the character kind of changes over time, but the basic idea is pretty close to what it was then. Copies of this, well, 45 in the census. Still not a ton, but 45, 1798s, which is surprising, and the highest number of graded copies, 796s, 594s, etc., etc. But this is the first, this graphic fantasy book. Did not know about this one back in my Wizard magazine reading days. So, yeah, this was something I learned about later. No copies sold recently. But, again, surprisingly, I did find 3 copies listed. Granted, raw copy, $4,000. Raw copy, $30,000. And then a green label, 9.0, looking basically for 15 grand. So, not a cheap book at all, and one I will probably not be adding to my collection. Maybe I'll grab a Megaton after all. With that said, I got one more character to kind of dive into here, kind of in the same vein as what we just did here with the dragon. And that character is, and I think we might have covered this before a little bit in some other shows, other things that I've done, but no harm, no foul in doing it again there. We got new watchers, new viewers, etc. So let's take a look at Hellboy. Right now we're in between movies. Maybe we get another movie with Hellboy. I've liked every Hellboy movies they've done. I like Guillermo del Toro's run. I like the David Harbour stuff. I just liked Hellboy. So I'm hoping for more. That said, back in the day, this was the book everybody wanted. Next Men, number 21. It's right there. Mike Mignola's Hellboy. This was the book. Granted, this came out December 1993. So, as you might imagine, there are a lot of copies. So, I don't really think this is to be a ghost. But I wanted to get into this because, again, popular opinion at the time. First color appearance of Hellboy. We can qualify it any way that we want. This was, again, what I thought of at the time as the more popular pick for that first appearance of Hellboy. 3,273 graded copies of this with a 199, 689, 98s, 959. There's a lot. There's a lot of copies. And as you might expect, yes, a lot of copies sold. This thing still sells for 100, 130 raw. You can see a 9.2, 150. So it does all right. And then asking prices, yes, there are more than these 4, but these are examples. 150 raw, $200 for a 9.6. There's an auction there. 9.8 looking for 375. So not a bad price on this book if you have one, but not his first. The next book that became the popular pick for the first appearance of Hellboy became San Diego Comic-Con. So the San Diego Comic-Con program, so it's issue 2 from 1993. We do inside get a tease. I'm not going to show you the tease. It's a black and white story. It's not a lot, but it is Hellboy, and he is inside. This came out in August of 1993, so it is before X-Men, so this would be technically first. And this is, again, another book that became a popular pick for the first appearance of Hellboy, especially when we got those Hellboy movies. Everybody started specking. They wanted to go jump back, and that's when a lot of these things started shaking out. With that, there's copies graded in there. Copy selling, $90 raw, $200 best offers, $280 for a raw copy, $225. There's more than these that sold, but to give you a sense, $100 to $200, this is still fetching at this time. And more than just these three, $600 raw, $300 for a 9.4, a 9.8's looking for $650. It's not a cheap book, and again, it is another option, but it's still not considered the first. Technically, we could go back a little bit further, go over to Italy and take a look at Dime Press 4, which we get this prototype. Granted, doesn't look exactly like the Hellboy that we know. He's more of a, black and white, does not red as we'd hope, but still maintains a lot of the look. He's got the shaved down horns. He's got the Fist of Doom or whatever it's called. Mike Mignola did do this. This is his creation. This was May of 1993. So again, earlier than San Diego. This also, Hellboy cover predates first U.S. appearance. So, as I said, people look at X-Men first full color appearance. They look at the San Diego Comic-Con book and say first U.S. appearance. This they look at predates the first U.S. appearance from Italy. We're really getting into the weeds here. And if we want to go even further, if you look at the thumbnail of this, that is actually a colored version of a sketch that came out even before this, because he was on the pamphlet of a Comic-Con, just like the little pamphlet that you get when you walk in, even before that. But he looks nothing like he does now. It was the first preliminary Hellboy kind of sketch that Mike Mignola did before that. So there's even that. But we're not going to get into that one. We're just going to stop here with the Dime Press, which has 241 copies in the census, 998s, 4996s, 48984s, etc. You can see them moving down the line. And despite this being a book from Italy from 1983 or whatever, or 1993 or whatever this was, it still sells. Almost $400 raw. You can see it's a little undersized. It's not a full-size comic, as that one picture with the CGC yellow label show you. It's a little smaller than a normal size comic. But that 8.5, best offer on $1,400. Another one, best offer on $800. Auction one went a little over $400. And there's a few more sales than just this. And even more surprising, there's more copies available too than just these 4. And even with these 4, $700, $3,000 for a 9.6, $700 raw, $1,000 raw. Definitely not a cheap book, and definitely one that, well, if you're looking, they're out there. They're expensive and a little tough to find. You may not find them everywhere, but if you go on shopping online, you could find these things these days. But that's all I got for you this week. Again, I had the longer list, but I felt like I would be here all night if I did the whole list. So I figured I'd stop here after 10, and we'll do the next set maybe a couple weeks or a little bit longer if I want to stretch it out. But we still have some other things to kind of get into, some more independent characters and first appearances, etc., of things like that, kind of classics like the ones we just covered here today. Hopefully you'll look forward to that. I'm looking forward to covering them. But for now, let's see what we got. You can see many of these books have copies, and they're copies available. So with those, we'll just call those hard to find. And that includes Cerebus, Bone, Megaton, the Graphic Fantasy, and then all 3 Hellboy options. However, we will move on and talk about these 3. The Gobbledygook, the Thorn, and the New England Comics Newsletter, because they're not even really like comics. That feels like they're something else entirely, but they are there. They're out there. They're just really, really tough to find, with no gobbledygooks that aren't counterfeits. 1 Thorn, looking for $60,000, and then 1 New England Comics Newsletter, which is graded at auction, will be ending on Sunday, with only 1 or none. That hits our mark to call them ghosts. I feel good about that this week, that those are the only 3 that we have. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any of these books. It would be awesome to know if you guys have any of these classics, these all-time independent classic characters first, because again, I grew up knowing about a lot of them, but did not have many or any in my collection. I think I had the Hellboy, the Next Men at one time, but I don't know where it is now. So if I still have it, it's here somewhere. If not, yeah, I'll get another one again eventually. But with that all said, thanks for stopping by and checking this out. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you look forward to the next one. And we are pivoting. I know during the Wednesday watch list, I was talking up us doing the Blood Hunt look ahead with Jack, but Jack can't make it tomorrow. So we're going to push that off till next week. So tomorrow on TAC, we'll be doing something a little bit different. We'll still be giving you the news, still be giving you our comic reviews, still be giving you those under the radar comics to keep an eye out for. But apart from that, we decided to pivot with WrestleMania being here in Philly this week. We're going to do a little bit of wrestling stuff. We're going to talk about some wrestling collectibles and look back at some of those old toys and do have a little fun tier listing them, because we've had fun tier listing those Joes, those Transformers. We're going to be doing Turtles soon. And for fun, let's just look at some of those old LJN, the big rubber figures, the little Hasbro guys, those Jakks figures with the real sweat. Yeah, it's going to be a blast. So make sure you join us tomorrow for that. And make sure you come back for all the content we hear, basically dropping every day. And with that said, I'll see you all later with some more content. All right.